breadths of beaks. In fact, the variations are quite small, and some later visitors actually had trouble identifying exactly what he discovered, because they all look vaguely similar. However, there may well be variation within a species, because we see that with all species, so nobody has a problem with microevolution. He also proposed what's called natural selection. That natural selection was proposed by Darwin as the mechanism for evolution. And what is commonly proposed is, as an example, is two types of pepper moth. They're simply black moths and white moths found in northern England. The black moth is called a melanic pepper moth, and the white one is called a typica pepper moth. And this is often quoted as proof of evolution. It's actually not really. What basically happened, sorry about that, what basically happened in the north of England in the industrial 1850s, around the time of the birth and life of Darwin, was that the industrial north was a very sooty place, and all the trees were rather blackened with all the soot from the chimneys. So the black melanic pepper moths had very good natural camouflage. They were black, and they could conceal themselves very easily on the black barks of the trees. Unfortunately, the poor old typica white moths didn't have the same advantage, and they were selectively picked off by all the birds. And that's often quoted as a type of evolution or natural selection. Now, that's quite different to, on the sixth day, we read in Genesis, God said, "Let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind, cattle and creeping thing and beast of the earth, each according to its kind." So God actually created things according to its different kinds. We call them species now. And so we see different species of dogs and rabbits and chickens and guinea pigs and all sorts of different things. And they're different species. Now, one of the major problems, as far as I can see, with evolution is it actually goes against some of the main and very important laws of physics. The most important law of physics is the first law of thermodynamics. And this is what it says. The first law of dynamics basically states, matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed. Repeat that again. You can't create matter or energy from nothing. So the creation of matter and energy from nothing is actually opposed to the most important law of physics. It's opposed to the first law of thermodynamics. You see, the evolutionists say that 20 billion years ago, they weren't there. I wasn't there either. But they say, long time ago, there was a big bang. There was a very big bang, and everything came out of nothing. That's not what the Bible says at all. The Bible says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and only very recently, 6,000 years ago. Now, this is the Humanist Manifesto, published in 1933. Humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created, which is actually not what the Bible says at all. So you can make your choice. You can either believe what the humanists have to say, that the universe is self-existing and not created, or you can believe what the Bible says. It's your choice. Now, here's a typical textbook, The Birth and Death of the Universe, and it talks about this is Prentice Hall General Science. It says that 18 to 20 billion years ago, all the matter in the universe was concentrated into one very dense, very hot region that may have been much smaller than the period on this page. And that's called the Big Bang. Now, the Big Bang began with a Belgian astronomer called George Edward Lemaitre, who died in 1966. And according to Isaac Asimov, some of you may have heard of him from his very good books on science fiction, but he was also quite a prominent scientist, Lemaitre conceived this mass to be no more than a few light years in diameter. At the very least, that would be 2 light years, or about 12 trillion miles. So I'm sure you appreciate that George Edward Lemaitre conceived that everything evolved from something that was 12 trillion miles across, which was big. By 1965, that figure was reduced to 275 million miles, By 1974 to 54,000 miles. By 1983 to a trillionth the diameter of a proton, and now to nothing at all. So you can see that in the space of, I don't know, maybe under 40 years, it's actually changed from a huge, something massive, to something so small it's nothing at all. That's called a singularity. It says here, on creating something from nothing, it says the observable universe could have evolved from an infinitesimal region. It's then tempting to go one step further and speculate that the entire universe evolved from literally nothing. Now, the Big Bang Theory is opposed to the second law of thermodynamics. So it's the second most important law in physics. Let's look at the second law of thermodynamics. If you tossed a pile of bricks off the back of a lorry, would you expect the pile of bricks to look like the one on the left or the one on the right? I think you'd agree with me that disorder is more probable. Well, according to the second law of thermodynamics, we have to deal with something called entropy, which means that everything basically goes downhill. Here's an attractive young lady at the age of 20, and here's the same lady at the age of 90. And here's the same lady at 3,000. You notice she didn't get better, she got worse. And that's because of the second law of thermodynamics. It's because of entropy. That's why a hot cup of coffee cools down, the sun is cooling down, the earth is slowing down, our metabolic rate slows as we grow older, and a high energy system will always decay to a low energy system. So evolution, if it were true, would reverse this invariable rule which we see around us wherever we look. Conclusion based on the second law of thermodynamics is simply that evolution is impossible. Now, evolutionists assume that by adding energy to an open system, this will simply overcome the second law of thermodynamics. However, God doesn't regard our universe as an open system. In fact, he regards it as a closed system. There are actually 11, there's height, width and depth, and then there's time and various other things as well. And God lives outside time completely. So as far as God is concerned, this universe is a closed system. Now, if you add energy, the evolutionists claim that adding energy will organize the system. However, our observations are that adding energy is destructive. When we add energy to something, it's very destructive. Now, for example, in the Second World War, there were atomic bombs added to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that's the closest we can get to, perhaps, it's nothing like the Big Bang, but I mean, that's the closest atomic explosion that this world has ever seen. But I'll tell you one thing, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it didn't organize anything. It just actually flattened both cities completely. Now, systems can't get more complex by evolution or a Big Bang. They simply can't. According to the second law of thermodynamics, which talks about entropy, systems can't get more complex by evolution. You see, the evolutionists like to say everything will get more involved, more complex and better, but actually that's not what the second law of thermodynamics has to say. Now we're going to look at the law of conservation of angular momentum. And this proves that the Big Bang Theory really is incorrect. Let's look at the law of conservation of angular momentum. I want you to look at that spinning object at the center of the slide there, and imagine that all those the balls spinning off it have spun off it and are all spinning in the same direction. Of course they are, and that's what you would expect, and that's to do with the law of conservation of angular momentum. If you look carefully, you can see little tiny moons or little tiny balls around the smaller balls that are spun off the big one, and they would be like the moons going around the planets. They're also rotating in the same direction. So the basic law is that everything spins in the same direction. If everything is going clockwise, then everything would go clockwise. Now let's make it simple so we can all understand what we're talking about. Here's some children playing